This video is solving quadratic equations by factoring part 2. In part 1, we've already done these steps. They haven't been written up, so if you want to copy them down and pause the video, that would be fine. Our steps to solve by factoring: number 1, get everything on one side in descending order equal to 0 on the other side. Then you factor, set each factor equal to 0, solve each of those little mini equations, and then be sure you check because you might make a goofy arithmetic or sign mistake. So those are your steps for solving quadratic equations by factoring. We're going to do some more of those equations, just a little more complicated than they were in the first part. Take 6x squared equals 8x. This is not in descending order equal to 0, so we need this 8x to come over to the other side. So we will subtract 8x from both sides. When we subtract 8x from both sides, we have it set up in the proper form. We're ready to factor. Now the kind of factor you have to think about is to take out the GCF. The GCF for 6x squared and 8x is 2x. When you divide each of these by the GCF of 2x, you will get that 3x minus 4 in the parentheses. You are ready to set these equal to 0. You may think this doesn't look like the ones in the other video, but it is. It is something times something else equals 0. Means I can set that part equal to 0, and I can set that part equal to 0, which gives me 2x equals 0 and 3x minus 4 equals 0. To solve this, this is 2 times x, undo by dividing by 2. 0 divided by anything is still 0. This side requires a couple steps. Add 4 to both sides, then divide both sides by 3, gives us x equals 4/3. Notice we keep getting 2 solutions. The reason we're getting 2 solutions is because the original problem began with x squared. There was a degree of 2 on our polynomial, and that's why we get 2 solutions. X squared equals 16 is not yet in the proper form, so we will subtract 16 from both sides. Subtracting 16 from both sides just brings it over to the left side, equal to 0. We're ready to factor. Now that kind of factoring, that's the difference of 2 squares, which will break into x plus 4 times x minus 4 equals 0. Ready to separate them? Set that equal to 0, set that equal to 0. And then solve. Solve the first one by subtracting 4 from both sides. Solve this one by adding 4 to both sides. Hopefully you realize that once you're into this position, this is the easy stuff. Just setting 2 little things equal to 0 and then solving. The trickiest thing is getting these things factored correctly. So if you're still not very good with factoring, go back and review the factoring techniques in the other videos and the other worksheets that have been posted. Here we have an equation not in the proper form. We have negative 3x squared. We don't want to factor something with a negative x squared term. It just makes all of our sign rules backwards. So what we want to do here is add 3x squared to both sides. If we add 3x squared to both sides, that's going to make the x squared term positive, and it will be easier to factor. So that will give us 3x squared plus x minus 10, and we're ready to start factoring that. Now pause for a second if you want and see if you can get this factored correctly yourself, and then see if you can get things solved out. This next screen here shows everything worked out for you. It factors as 3x minus 5 times x plus 2. Set that equal to 0, set that equal to 0, and solve. This side was pretty easy to solve. All you had to do was subtract 2 from both sides. This requires 2 steps to solve. Add your 5 to both sides. And when you do that, you're going to then divide by 3, which gives you x equals 5/3. Here's another one that sometimes students make mistakes on. As I said a couple minutes ago, we do not want the x squared term to be negative. It just makes things harder to do. So I want to add 2x squared to both sides. If you add 2x squared to both sides, we're going to have a positive x squared. Also, I'm going to have to clean this up so that I end up with it in the proper order. All of my expression is over here on the right side. If you don't like the expression on the right side, you can take the entire expression, the entire equation, and just flop it around so that it brings the 2x squared plus 9x plus 7 to the left side where you're used to seeing it equal to 0. Pause the video, see if you can get it factored and solved out on your own now. It factors as 2x plus 7 times x plus 1. Set each one equal to 0, and then solve. And by now you should be pretty good at this solving stuff. This is very easy. Subtract 1 from both sides. Over here, subtract 7 from both sides, and then divide by 2. When you go to check, you need to check in the original equation. So if I were to check this x equals -1, I would be putting it back in the original. I'd have to do -2 times -1 quantity squared equals 7 plus 9 times -1. And we're checking to see if this is equal. So really there's a question mark right here. -1 squared is a +1 times -2 is -2. On this side, 9 times -1 is -9. So this is really 7 minus 9, which is -2, and it checks. Same thing will happen if you check with the -7/2. You should always be in the habit of checking these equations because it's better for you to find the mistake than for your instructor. Now, if you look at this equation here, this begins with x cubed. It's not considered a quadratic equation because the degree of the polynomial is 3, but we can still use factoring to solve this equation. This just means we're going to have to take out a GCF before we end up with a quadratic. The GCF for these three terms is 2x. If you take 2x out of all of those, you have this, 2x times this trinomial, because dividing each of these by 2x will leave you with this trinomial. This trinomial is a quadratic. You can factor this as x plus 6 times x plus 2. Note the GCF that we took out in the beginning is still part of our factorization. There are 3 factors. This means we have multiplied something times something times something to get 0. That still means one of these things has to be the thing that was equal to 0. So set each one of these equal to 0. And you have these little mini equations to solve. Divide by 2, move your 6 and your 2 over to the other side, gives us these 3 answers, 0, -6, and -2. Note, we have 3 answers this time, and the reason is we had x to the 3rd. So a fact is, if the degree of the equation is 3, there will be 3 solutions.